sort of I guess I would say, in the scheme of programs, this is going to fall under the category of tragedy. And it's not. It's one of those that I read about this a couple of years ago, and I thought, would it be a program? It just depresses me to even get into it. But I started to look into it a little bit more, and the more I got into it, I'm thinking, wow, this really it's got all the elements of a drama or a story that has some depth to it. In part because the hero or the villain starts up here in life and he ends up way down there. So that it's a big gap there. This is not the story of someone who was, sort of inclined to doing dishonest and illegal things. That's part of it. And the other part that made it really interesting was when he was taken to court and being sentenced, he had a statement that he read, which explains from his view what happened and why this all happened, which you normally wouldn't get. I mean, this happened 140 years ago. So you'd have to read in between the lines a lot. But in this case, the person that we're talking about actually explains it all. And you can judge for yourself. And also, I was thinking, you should try to figure out, how does his mind work? Because this is a lot of bad stuff that happened, and yet he thinks of himself as a very good person. So, with that, let's talk about the Big Swindle in Duanesburg, 1883. I guess one thing is, I'm assuming you can all hear me. Yeah. So I don't need to talk any louder. This is New York Times, a remarkable swindler. It's been discovered that Emmett O'Neill, 43 years old, a Schenectady broker, recently failed and fled, victimizing parties in Schenectady and Duanesburg for not less than $2.4 million. Widows, orphans, the industrious and poor are alike his victims. With the wealthy classes, nearly every person in Duanesburg was swindled. Now that 2.4, I did convert that into 2024 dollars. But that gives you an idea of the scale of this. Emmett O'Neill was a highly respected citizen. He had a reputation for integrity that it was such that many of the confiding folk of Schenectady County, especially the farmers, made him the custodian of their money to invest as he might deem best. All went apparently well until one day Mr. O'Neill was detected in a forgery. And then there came an exposure that brought despair to many a family that suddenly realized it was left penniless. Now this is at a time, of course, when there's no Social Security. I mean, your financial security, as you get older, it was dependent on the money that you would put aside. And you can imagine that if you were not a particularly wealthy person and just had a limited amount saved, that you would be in big trouble if you were at retirement age, let's say. Nearly every person in the town of Duanesburg is a victim. These are our headlines from the newspapers. And these quotes, what I'm reading is from the newspapers. It's not something I wrote. For those who gave O'Neill money to invest, he gave as security forged mortgages. He would also forge notes. He had 8 notes out as collateral, purporting to be signed by Colonel Church, and each being for $5,000. Only 2 of these notes were genuine. So $5,000 in 1883 is $160,000. So he had 5 of these notes. 3 of them were forgeries. And he left. Broker flees after fleecing victims in March 1883. Before leaving Schenectady on the midnight train, O'Neill, taking a $100 greenback in his hand, went from store to store asking to have it changed. No one could change it, so he borrowed money from each storekeeper and victimized over 20 residents of Schenectady by this game. Again, in part of the New York Times article. And they also published a list of everyone who lost money and had given money to this broker. So this is, again, converted into 2024 dollars, but it shows you how much money some people, they gave Emmett O'Neill all of their money to invest. And this is only part of it. It goes on, it's quite a lengthy list. For those who lost money entrusted with O'Neill included the trustees of Union College and the bookkeeper at the Schenectady Bank. His mother and sisters are also left penniless. A fund from the will of Catherine Duane, left in trust to the Sunday School of Christ Church and the Duanesburgh Library Association, was also entirely lost. So if you wondered about the library in Duanesburg, the Duanesburgh Library actually could have started quite a bit earlier, because apparently Catherine Duane left money for it. And anyway, all that was gone. So how bad was it? Well, John Little, a farmer from Duanesburg, age 70, committed suicide by hanging. Little, with Emmett O'Neill, the Schenectady banker, now in jail, were trustees of the estate of Little's sister, and everything was swept away by O'Neill's collapse. Accordingly, she began suit against her brother, but when the officer arrived to serve the papers, Little was dead. So that's how bad it was. And here's the swindler. The Watertown Times says, the life of Emmett O'Neill, the Schenectady broker, who has for years systematically swindled the people of this city and the adjacent towns, if fully written, would present a most extraordinary record of crimes. And guess what? His hometown is Duanesburg. What we're talking about, Duanesburg, the hamlet. He was from a well-known and respected family. He was the son of one of the richest men in Duanesburg. He was the town supervisor. And he also had been a former state assemblyman. So this is somebody who started, in a family that was well respected, and his father was a very wealthy man, and he had been elected to be town supervisor 3 successive years, and also as state assemblyman. So let's talk a little bit about the Duanesburgh O'Neills. Emmett's father, James, was born in Ireland, arrived in Schenectady about 1820 when he was 20 years old. He married Elizabeth Marsh from Mariahville. She's the daughter of Silas Marsh. And the Marshes were a big family in that area. And he was the one that built the original store at Mariahville Lake that became the Peaks store. And I think it's still the Lakeside store. The store there is still that. Well, anyway, that was her father who started that business. They moved to Duanesburg and they raised 5 children. In 1826, O'Neill opened a store in the hamlet, which the family ran for the next 50 years. So here's a picture of the store, which was architecturally, you can't quite see it, but it's got a round facade. And he opened it about 1826, and it went for another 50 plus years.
Carl, what are those streets?
What are the streets? This is on the corner of the intersection with Route 20 is on the right, and Route 7 is on the left. And you can...
That's where the sewer is.
No, it's across. It's the other.
The Veterans Memorial.
Yeah, well, I got a picture to show you what it is today.
I remember that being a liquor store.
You can see that the roads are all dirt. Yeah. So this 1948 historical bulletin says O'Neill's store was fronted with that circular facade. An old sign hung in the store. Remained there a long time, even after it changed hands, and it read, "If you don't see what you want, ask for it." It housed the post office, and several men used to gather there in the evening to visit and play cards. Mr. O'Neill carried on a prosperous business there until he died in 1879. So you can see that store. I mean, this is the community place. People would come and talk and gossip and play cards and do whatever. But, small town like this in the 1830s, 1840s, people didn't travel far. And everyone would have known everybody. This is the map that shows where the store was. It's right there. Right on that intersection. This Western Turnpike, of course, is Route 20. The other unlabeled road is Route 7. And I think the Plank Road is Depot Road, I think. You can also see the school in here. That would have been, where is it? Now I lost my pointer. But anyway, the school is here. I just point that out to remind everyone, if you grew up in Duanesburg, that's where you went to school with all the other kids in Duanesburg or in the area. So again, you would have known everybody, I think. And the other thing to point out is the business directory. The second name down there is J. O'Neill. That's James O'Neill. It says merchant and real estate agent because he not only had the store, but as he settled into Duanesburg and had more capital, he would loan people money to buy land or buy a farm and take the mortgage, hold the mortgage, and they would pay off the mortgage. But he did that as well as run the store. And that, he had a very good reputation for honesty, integrity, and whatever. So this is the site today. It's at Veterans Park, right across from Stewart's. That was where the O'Neill store at one time stood. This is the family. So James O'Neill marries Elizabeth Marsh. They had 5 kids in Duanesburg. They had James, Anna, Daniel, Isabella, and Emmett. And you can see, these are the children, all brought up in Duanesburg, all went to that school, I'm sure. James, the oldest, he went on to, he ran a business in Albany, and then he went to New York, and then he went to the West Coast. He was the mayor of Portland, Oregon. And after his serving as mayor, he went to Washington. He was a state senator there. So he was quite an accomplished guy. Anna married John Banker, an attorney and Schenectady County clerk. And Daniel, he also went west with his brother. And he lived in Oregon City, Oregon, and worked for a steamship company as a purser. Isabella married an attorney, a county judge, and she had 5 children. And then Emmett was the town supervisor and New York State Assemblyman. Oh, gee. So we talked about him, James, the father, being wealthy. This is from the census of 1870, and they asked in that year, they said, what's the value of your real estate and what's the value of personal property? You can't quite make this out. Oh, wait a minute. This is what I want. Here's James O'Neill. And you can't quite see that, but that's $40,000. 40000. And that's the value of his personal property. In other words, that's how much he has in the bank, I guess. And then he has another $5,000 in real property. Here it is. Yeah, it's right here. But if you could read this, this is just that one page. And look at these other, how much money do you have in the bank? That's something like, it's hard to read that one, but $500, $250, $28, $100, $200, and the real property, $1,000, $400, $700, $2,000, up here $3, I think. But this is a farmer. You can see all the people on that page of the census. Nobody has $40,000. That is a lot. And that today would be over $1 million. So in 1870, when James, he's 70 years old, and he's run that store all those years, he's a wealthy man. Certainly by Duanesburg standards. 1872, the New York Herald sent a reporter up to do a story of local interest, and so I don't know exactly what the purpose was, but it was just to get local flavor. And so he went to Quaker Street in Duanesburg, and he wrote up kind of a long article. This part of the article talked about the richest man in Duanesburg, Jimmy O'Neill. He's the owner of the country store, principal and richest resident of Duanesburg. He owns most of the land left by Kate Duane, the latest heir to the name, and may probably be worth more than $1 million. All of this wealth has been accumulated penny by penny. Old and rich as he is, he still watches every scrap or bit of money that goes in and out of his coffers, sitting in his store from sunrise to sunset in an old-fashioned leather-bottomed chair. So that's quite an image, you know.
Well, Kate Duane would be Kitty Duane. She's the one who built the Duane Mansion.
Yes, yep, and a daughter of James Duane.
Yeah, right.
Yep. So if you think about that, and you think about what kind of personality he had, or what kind of person he might have been, he was probably pretty frugal, and certainly devoted to his business. He was well known and widely respected, being a man whose word was as good as his bond. His honorable career gained him the confidence and affection of the community. 5 years before his death, the entire management of his estate was entrusted to Emmett. I heard all. See, and Emmett, succeeding to his father's business, Emmett also had the respect and absolute confidence of the people.
Can we back up a minute? What was the connection between him and Catherine Duane?
Catherine, well, this is the article. It said that he's the latest, he may be, where is it? The land. He owns most of the land that was left to Kate Duane. And that's because he was selling mortgages, or letting people would buy the land and he would hold the mortgage. So I think that's what that refers to. Okay, so here's Emmett, the youngest, born in 1840. Now, when he's born, his father's 40 years old. He's the last of the kids. His two older brothers had gone west by the time he was 12, and his sisters were married and lived in Schenectady. So Emmett's by himself at home, and he works in the family store. I'm sure his father, was grooming him to be, he was going to be the next store owner manager. As an adult, he was a fine-looking man with an affable manner and posing a pleasing address, which few people could resist and few are gifted. So, to me, I read that and say, that means he was a schmoozer. He was like a likable person. Everybody loved Emmett. And Emmett was working in the store. So if you went in and bought anything, or you hung around at all, you'd know Emmett. And plus, you would have maybe have gone to school with him if you were his age. And he was a great guy to hang around with. Now, the census, there's a federal census and a state census, and federal comes every 10 years, and the state comes in between. And it asks, what do you do? So every one of these census, you see Emmett, and at least when he's 15 years old, he's store clerk. 5 years later, he's store clerk. The Civil War starts in 1861, and he disappears. He doesn't live at home. In 1865, there's no Emmett there. I don't know what happened to him. I couldn't find any record. But in 1870, he's back home, and it says store clerk. That's what he does. And it also has his father. His father says retired merchant. So Emmett is he's still probably being tutored by his father, and he's 30 years old. So, but at 30, he turns 30, or 31, and he gets elected to be town supervisor. And the next year, 72, he marries Ann Cole, and he buys a house in Duanesburg, somewhere, I don't know where. 1876, he's elected to be Assemblyman and serves for a year. In 1878, he moved to Schenectady. 1879, his father dies. And in 1880, I think, sometime around there, Schenectady Bank, he's elected to be a director of the bank. He's a fine-looking man, as was said in the earlier slide, with an affable manner, posing a pleasing address, which few people can resist and which few are gifted. And this is his family. Anna Cole, Elizabeth and Helen, both born, I think, in Duanesburg. They moved to Schenectady in 1878, and Hugh, their son, was born there. This is the Duanesburg. I love this picture. It's just, it's. I think I read. I couldn't find it, but Russell's blacksmith shop in Duanesburg. So that would be kind of the picture of, people. It's big dirt roads and people working.
That would be the corner that Stewart's is on.
Is this Stewart's?
Yeah.
The site. This is the site of Stewart's. Okay, opposite the store. Yeah. And here's where Emmett moves the family. Washington Avenue in Schenectady. And you can see, now the street's paved, there's sidewalks, there are nice buildings. He did not buy one of these bigger homes. He was at 44 Washington Avenue, which is right where Union Street comes into Washington Avenue. But now, where that house is and where all of these on the right-hand side are, that's the Y. So all of them were taken down. But this building, this one, is still there. You can see that. So this is where he moves in 1878. And he starts his business career. He moves to Schenectady, he opens a law office. 1880, he was admitted as a partner in Sherman-Hearn's real estate and insurance, but the other members of the firm, believing he was reckless, retired him from the firm in 1881. He was also a member of the drug house, Hanson and Company, in 1881, but that partnership was quickly terminated. And since that time, he's done business alone as a real estate and investment agent. So he did that one census. It says, "What is your occupation?" He puts down lawyer. I'm not sure, but that's the only time that I found a reference to him being a lawyer. He most of the time wanted to be broker. Nope. Jeez. So James O'Neill dies. And he's not buried in the Duanesburg Cemetery. He's buried in Vale Cemetery. You can tell by the monument that he had some money. Jeez. Emmett, going to Schenectady with an unsullied reputation, O'Neill was recognized as a first-class businessman. Having the handling of his father's estate and being presumably wealthy, he was elected director of the Schenectady Bank. By this means, he could inspect the books and find out who had idle capital and act accordingly. Having ascertained that a man had money in the bank at 3% interest, he would visit him and get him an investment at 5 or 6%. So that sounds a little unethical, or maybe a lot unethical. And here's another skill that Emmett had. He was an expert penman. He could imitate any handwriting so closely that it was almost impossible to detect the counterfeit. Happening in a hotel one day when Judge Tappan came in, O'Neill went to the register and wrote the judge's signature so nicely that when His Honor divested himself of his overcoat and stepped up the register, he gazed with surprise and remarked that he had forgotten he'd already registered. So this tells you a couple of things. I mean, one is that he can copy signatures, but the other thing is you think about this. I mean, I don't know what year this was. I don't even know for sure this was true, but I read this. This was one of the things that the newspapers picked up on, because what kind of judgment if a judge comes in and you're with your friends and you say, "Watch this," and you go over and you fill in that register. I mean, I don't know how many people would do that. I mean, I can see maybe if you were 18 years old or 19 years old. Well, what if you're 35? I mean, would you tweak just to get a laugh, I guess, out of your friends? I mean, whoa. Well, unless he was good friends with a judge. But anyway, it just shows something about his judgment. And unfortunately, he was a speculator, and not only speculating, but recklessly speculating. Apparently, this definition of stock market speculation I found on the internet. It's trying for quick profit, ignoring risks. And then the other part that they threw in here on this website, they said buying on margin, paying a small percentage in borrowing the rest in order to buy a stock that you're speculating in. Well, if you know that a stock is going to go up significantly and you can borrow money, the smart thing to do is you put your money in and then you borrow, and if you only have to put up 10% of your own cash and borrow 90%, you can leverage when that stock goes up, then you sell it and you get the profit, you pay back the money you owe, but you've picked up a lot of extra profit there. So that's what I think that Emmett was up to. But this kind of came to an end. March 6th, the Utica Daily Press says Emmett O'Neill's liabilities are said to be heavy. During the past week, such a large amount came due that Mr. O'Neill was unable to meet it. The cause of Mr. O'Neill's embarrassment is attributed to excessive speculation in hops. And I did find a picture of hops, which I thought would maybe make you think of Brussels sprouts, but those are hops. So, Albany Argus in March said he's in a deep hole. His liabilities are $163,000. His assets are $13,000. That means he owes $150,000. In 1883, that's like $4.5 million. So guess what? March 12th, 1883. What does Emmett do? Does he face up? No. He skips down. And when they go to his office and they look in the safe, what's there? Nothing but a revolver, a gold watch, and a few papers. Oh, gee. And I would say this is an unfortunate combination, to be a real skilled penman who can copy people's signature and speculation. So his crookedness consisted of forgery, partly of embezzlement. One of his devices was to convert securities entrusted to his keeping into cash, which he squandered in speculation. Meanwhile, he covered his thefts by paying interest to the people he robbed out of the proceeds of their securities, so they suspected nothing. So, again, it's hard to imagine. I mean, he must have been, going back and forth and trying to keep track of all these accounts and still had this idea that he was going to speculate and make all this money. But every time, it seemed like he's got to be the worst speculator in the world. So he took off. The word came out that he was probably in New York City, so that they sent a detective after him. On June 19th, the detective caught up to him. When he was arrested, he had a single dollar to eke out a living. He was clothed in a suit of clothes which he took in flight, which he took flight in 3 months earlier, on material that was dirty and worn. His appearance was haggard. So there again, the original speculation was he took all his money. He took off and he went to Europe or he did something like that. But it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like he didn't have any money when he left. So now we're both 3 months again. They took him back to Schenectady. He went to jail. And in September he comes to trial. And this reporter interviewed him and wrote and published his statement. But anyway, the reporter says he was taken into the courtroom, arraigned for trial, having been indicted by the grand jury. He pleaded guilty to the indictments and read a prepared statement regarding his transgressions. He received his sentence of 10 years at Clinton Prison as coolly as if it had been an invitation to a tea party. So again, you think about I don't know, what kind of person was he? Just, it's hard to understand all that. So here's the statement. He's got a long statement. The paper published it. And so I pulled a couple of pieces out of it that I thought were pretty revealing. Emmett O'Neill says, I enter the plea of guilty as charged. The presumption of law is that I premeditated each or such offense with the intent to offend. I know that the court must measure the intent to offend by the act of offense. But the searching of human hearts has been reserved by one to himself and is jealously guarded. So what he's saying is, I broke the law, but I didn't plan it. So to him, that's mitigating circumstances. He says, I take this opportunity to turn to my old friends and neighbors who I have served well and some I've served ill. I ask of them, as was asked of God by the royal prophet David 3,000 years ago, rebuke ye not in thine anger, neither chasten thee in thy hot disposition. This is my translation of what he says. Don't be mad just because I lost your money. He goes on to say, I went out from among you, my friends and neighbors, half a year ago, not freely and of my own volition, not to take and carry away and conceal untold thousands of dollars, but for, as I thought, a few weeks' respite and rest from the importunities of those whom I owed and whose claims I could not meet. I had to look up importunities, which means, somebody's making demands on you. So here's what this means. I never wanted to skip town, but I was harassed. He goes on. You can tell he's kind of running for office, maybe. I don't know. I call God to witness the absolute truth of saying that all my trouble and distress, and the trouble and distress that through me has come to others, may be attributed to a tender heart, a willingness to bear others' burdens, a disposition to believe in the honesty and honor of mankind, and bearing and forbearing with debtors to me. This all happened because I'm such a good person. I go forth now to a new, unhallowed, and humiliating life, to make such reparation as called for by law, which I have broken, with no intention in my heart of injuring in person or in purse one soul who confided in me. The very fear of being thought dishonest may have the effect sometimes to make a man seem to be, if you please, dishonest. So what he's saying is, I was afraid people might think I was dishonest, and this made me dishonest. I mean, I don't follow the logic of that either. That's a hard one. Someday, he says, I will return among you and claim your respect and not be ashamed to meet the eye of any man, and hope that when death comes to me, I may owe no one penny. In other words, you may never get your money, but I'm sure you're going to respect me when I return from prison. And here's Emmett's home from 1883 to 1890, which isn't 10 years. But he turned out that he was an excellent prisoner. He was really good. I mean, they liked him. And he got to be the bookkeeper for the... I know. He was not out on the stone yard breaking stones with a sledgehammer. He had a nice office job. And he got early release. Emmett O'Neill of Schenectady will have served his time next Wednesday, it having been a term of 6 years and 5 months. He was once a prominent figure in business circles, but there got into a hole and was convicted of extensive forgeries. His wife has supported herself by keeping boarders. And again, that line makes me think, okay, I mean, maybe he didn't have any money. Maybe all the money was gone because his wife is, she's back home with 3 kids, and she's taking in boarders. He did his time, but his investors were still angry at him. So it's said that the farmers who lost by him are unrelenting, and that prosecutions may follow his reappearance in Schenectady. So he didn't get a chance to go and claim their respect and look them all in the eye and tell them how wonderful he was. Instead, he headed to the West Coast, where his 2 brothers were. And he was going to recover that fortune and come back. Now this is, let's see, he's like a 50-year-old ex-con who was in the whole, what was it, $4.5 million. I'm going to head west and make all that money back. I don't know. That doesn't strike me as, he's just not, I don't know, in some ways, he's impractical sometimes. He goes to Grace Harbor, which is about as far away from Duanesburg and Schenectady as you possibly can get. It's on the coast. And he finds somebody to be his partner, and O'Neill and Johnson formed this partnership, I think, with real estate. And then there's a gap of a year or so. Tacoma, Washington, January 26th. At 7 a.m., the officer Higgins met O'Neill staggering about as if drunk on Pacific Avenue. There was no odor of liquor about him, and his condition mystified the police officer. So he was placed in a cell at 9, was resting quietly, and asked the jailer not to disturb him. At 10:30, he was found dead cold in the cell. So here he is, a 51-year-old from Duanesburg, and he winds up dead in a cell in Tacoma, Washington. The coroner said that O'Neill died of heart disease. Unfortunate real estate investment left him penniless. The fact that $3 was found in his pockets discredits the rumor that he had starved to death. The Schenectady relatives ordered the body to be embalmed and shipped to that city. So that's what happened. And this is where he's buried in Vale Cemetery, along with where his parents are also buried. And I just note that Anna, his wife, she also is buried there. So I don't know what happened with their relationship, but she didn't totally abandon, want nothing to do with him. So it was his almost insane passion for speculation and his belief that he could sometime retrieve the losses before detection came that led him deeper and deeper into the mire. I think that's probably, it sounds like an accurate assessment. In other words, he had money that people gave him to invest, he lost it, but he just couldn't admit that he made a mistake, so he just kept doing that over and over and kept losing more and more money. Whenever friends have called on him in prison, he has signified his intention to make money enough after his release to repay all he had stolen, as if that was the easiest thing in the world to do. Well, obviously not the easiest thing. But the other thing about that line is friends visit him in Dannemora. So with all the stuff that he did, he still had friends who would go up to Dannemora to see how he was doing. So who was he? He was charming, attractive, he had a lot of friends, he was trusted, he was well educated. But he was also reckless, he was unethical, he seemed to be addicted to speculation, and he became a forger and an embezzler. A tragedy for him, for his family, for John Little, who took his own life, and for all those who had trusted Emmett O'Neill with their savings. So that's my program, which is kind of it's a tragedy. I was trying to think of, okay, what is there anything positive about this? But he just happened to be the wrong person in the wrong place, and he had attracted all these other people, and he brought everybody down. It just, one after another, anyone who had anything to do with him, and was captivated by his personality, and said, "Sure, I'll give you my savings. You sound like you know what you're talking about." and he must have been a good talker. So it was, everybody lost, but he lost. If you think about that, I mean, he started with his father who had an estate of $1 million. He gets, his father turned it over to him in about 1874 or 5. So he can manage that, and I guess he must have gone out and speculated. Then he goes to Schenectady and gets deeper and deeper and deeper into it, and then winds up in going to prison. Then he goes out to the West Coast, and he winds up dead in a jail cell in Tacoma, Washington, with $3 in his pocket within a 10-year span. I mean, he started at age 42, and he dies at age 51. In 10 years, his whole life went. So that's dramatic enough that you can see, yeah, somebody was a writer, and they wanted to write a sort of historical fiction. You take those facts and you put that together, and start to read in, okay, what was the relationship between him and his father, or him and his mother, and how could it possibly happen? But there's something about his thinking, or maybe he just was, like it was a gambling addiction or something. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, so, but I think that story is it's a tragic story, and unfortunately, a lot of people in Duanesburg apparently who knew the family, who went to school with him, went to the store, knew his wife's family, the Marshes. I mean, they had relatives all over the place. And this was a town back then that would have been all farmers. And to hear that, you could make 5%, maybe 6%, you know how my dad treated you well, and I've been behind that counter all these years. You know me, so give me your money and I'll invest it, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. So, anyway.